Hello guys, thank you so much for coming back to watch another video on my channel. Whether you like it or not, we're eventually gonna get Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake because Capcom has been listening to the fans and the community for the next remake they want to work on, and the most requested title from Capcom has been Code Veronica Remake. However, the big question is that what changes do we need and what changes we will see from the next Code Veronica Remake. So without wasting any time, let's discuss those changes in this video. Now if you're brand new to my channel and you do end up liking this video I've made for you, do give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It would allow me to make more of these videos for you guys. Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake has been the most requested remake from Capcom since the announcement of Resident Evil 2 Remake. However, as much as I love Resident Evil Code Veronica and I know this game came out decades ago, it requires some changes, and we will see those changes from Capcom, which they have been doing successfully from Resident Evil 2 Remake up to Resident Evil 4 Remake. Now Capcom is aware that what fans and community want from Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake, and based on their own experience from the recent remakes they've been making, they know what sort of structure they need to follow to apply on this Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. So here's a list of the changes we would expect to see from Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. Now the most obvious changes we will see would be a graphical and the gameplay changes. We're going to see an overhaul from the old Resident Evil Code Veronica, which came out a decade ago. They have a brand new RE engine, and on which Resident Evil titles has been looking more realistic. So Resident Evil Code Veronica would exactly get the same sort of treatment which Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake and Resident Evil 4 Remake had. Now if you're talking about the gameplay changes, let's look at Resident Evil 2 Remake, which adopted the style of Resident Evil 4, which is over the shoulder third-person camera perspective compared to the tank controls we've seen originally in Resident Evil 2. The same thing continued with Resident Evil 3 Remake, and obviously in Resident Evil 4 Remake it's pretty much followed the same structure of the original Resident Evil 4. Now based on the new structure which Capcom has been following, that we would expect the mainline titles to continue with the first person camera perspective, and the remakes to continue the tradition as a third person over the shoulder camera angles. Now this camera perspective has been quite successful for them with the remakes, because if you look at Resident Evil 2 Remake, it is still a survival horror game, whereas Resident Evil 4 continue the action horror title, which was the original Resident Evil 4 was, and they both follow the same sort of camera angle, but how the structure of the gameplay works, it completely elevates both remakes in their own perspective. So if you look back to the original Resident Evil Code Veronica, it followed the structure of the original Resident Evil titles, which is still survival horror. So we would expect that Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake would follow the same footsteps of Resident Evil 2 Remake or 3 Remake by keeping the survival horror element, however getting an update on the camera perspective. Now whether you enjoy Resident Evil Code Veronica or you hate it, you will still agree that the characters and the character development in that game was actually really bad, and it was one of the negative points of the original Resident Evil Code Veronica. And this was the area which hurted Resident Evil Code Veronica, because you have characters like Steve, which I think is one of my least favourite characters of the game. And same goes for Albert Wesker, and let's not talk about the Ashford twins we've seen at the end of the game. There was literally zero development for those characters in the game. And we see them appear here and there, and then they just don't serve much of a purpose in the game and the overall structure of the game. And I think this was the area which required the most update or most overhaul from Capcom. To be honest, when I played Resident Evil Code Veronica, the most character who annoyed me the most was Steve, and I never cared about this character, to be honest, I'm not going to lie to you, because how the character was written in the game. And towards the end of the game, when we see Alexia and Alfred and how those characters had a twist at the end of the game, it didn't turn out to be as serious as I was thinking, as a jaw-dropping moment. It was actually hilarious for me. So the character development of all those characters was really bad, so I think this is where they need to do a massive overhaul when they're going to be working on Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. And it brings me to my next point, that it requires a more serious tone and a more serious writing in the game. Now I'm not going to blame the original actors who voiced these characters, but due to bad writing, it had the most cringiest lines or cringiest dialogues I've seen in the whole Resident Evil series. Characters like Steve and Ashford twins, they honestly just sounded terrible even if you play the game today, and today's standards will require a more serious writing, and I think that's where we're going to see a massive overhaul. And the same goes for Chris and Claire Redfield. They didn't have much to add to the game, and due to the demand we have in the industry right now, especially with the horror gaming, that we see now more serious actors playing these roles. So we will be expecting that they would do a massive overhaul with the characters like Steve and Ashford Twin, Albert Wesker, and even the main protagonist of the game, that the overall writing would feel more serious and the stakes should feel more serious in Code Veronica Remake. Resident Evil Code Veronica follows straight after the events of Raccoon City from the original Resident Evil 2. Now, Resident Evil 2 Remake turned out to be a massive success for Capcom, and it is literally the highest selling title right now. So if you're looking at Claire Redfield and Chris Redfield from after the events of Raccoon City, then those story elements needs to be added in the game, and we need to see a bit more backstory as to how Claire ended up to Rockford Island in search of Chris Redfield. Then we have Albert Wesker, who comes into the major player on the background, and he got brand new powers and how he survived. So we need to see that sort of a story element from Albert Wesker's perspective. We can either see in a similar way we've seen with Ada Wong, a brand new DLC for Resident Evil Code Veronica, which can come post Code Veronica Remake. And then obviously Chris Redfield comes to rescue Claire Redfield, and he's been told by Leon S. Kennedy. So that's the sort of story we need to see into the Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. And this could be a title that could bridge Resident Evil 5 Remake if, let's say, Capcom decide to make that game in the future. Then it would make more sense to Claire Redfield's journey, and same goes for Albert Wesker, as how their animosity between them has been growing since the original Resident Evil all the way to Resident Evil 5 Remake, including Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. So I think it's very important to add those backstories and be a connecting tissue between the mainline titles. And it's not about the additional story elements we can see, that they can also change in the whole story structure and how it works out for Claire Redfield while keeping the same main theme of the original game, but you can add more things and change a few things for a few character arcs, like for example Steve and Albert Wesker and how those plays out throughout the game. So I think Capcom would do those changes with the story. It will make more sense with the mainline titles and also add more weight to the whole story of Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. And lastly, I think the environmental structure needs to change for that game. The game had a lot of backtracking, but it felt a bit slower and it felt linear for me, when I was surprised when this game was a bit larger in scope compared to the original Resident Evil titles. Now there are some areas I've really loved in original Resident Evil Code Veronica, but there were some areas which I think could have had much improvement. I think they can do that with the Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. It also goes for some of the enemy and boss fight placements, and I think this is something they need to change with the overall structure, that we can see some boss fight which could be exclusive to Chris Redfield later on in the game, and some boss fight could only be exclusive to Claire Redfield. However, the backtracking shouldn't be more challenging, and I think it should give you more areas to explore while not feeling sluggish, and I think this would improve on the overall structure of Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. Add more creative puzzles they did in Resident Evil 2 Remake, and I think Resident Evil Code Veronica kind of follows the original Resident Evil 2. So if they're going to continue with the Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake, they can use the same sort of structure with the Resident Evil 2 Remake, where we've seen some of the puzzles which were actually quite challenging in some areas, and same goes for backtracking. Backtracking was, I think, superb in Resident Evil 2 Remake. So if they follow the same structure of Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake could benefit much from that sort of backtracking and that sort of exploration of the whole environment. So what do you guys think about the changes I've mentioned in this video? Please do let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below in this video. So that's it for the video, guys. I'll catch you again with another video on my channel. Until then, look after yourself. Have a good one.